Thanksgiving is a difficult holiday for a lot of people. I'm not trying to suggest that anyone objects to the idea of taking some time to express their gratitude for all that they have on principle. It's just that so much of our lives are focused on what we don't have, on which of our needs aren't being met, and what isn't going the way we'd like it to, that this simple task of giving thanks often ends up being quite difficult. Like it's not a difficult concept to understand, but it's just not what we're used to. Uh, this goes for me as well, actually. I struggle with the practice of identifying and expressing what it is I have to be thankful for. However, I know that just because I find a practice to be difficult, that doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. Indeed, life, and especially the Christian life, is full of things that we know we should do even though they are difficult. So if you find it hard to identify and express what it is you have to be thankful for, I get it. But it is still a good thing to do. It is good to give thanks. It's good for our relationship with God. It's good for our relationships with other people. It's even good for our emotional states. You see, engaging in the deliberate practice of giving thanks helps to reveal just how much we actually have to be thankful for. Indeed, it's a surefire way to recognize that God has been doing more in our lives and in the world than we had previously given him credit for. With that in mind, what I want us to do is to read part of a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote, and he wrote this letter in prison, I might add. He wrote it to the church in Philippi, and in this part of the letter, he talks about how he maintains an attitude of thanksgiving. And my hope is that we will all learn something from his example that we will be able to apply in our own lives. So, we will read Philippians chapter 4, 8 to 20. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Yet it was good of you to share in my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. Not that I desire your gifts. What I desire is that more may be credited to your account. I have received full payment and have more than enough. I am amply supplied now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to God. And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. To our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Lord, teach us what this means. Teach us how we can recognize what you are doing in us and through us, and how we can recognize just how we also have been amply supplied by your grace, by your love and mercy, Lord. And Lord, let us be like that to others. May we be that source of love and of gifts to others, so that we can be just messengers of your gospel, Lord. Lord, we love you and we trust you. In Jesus' holy and precious name, amen. So I want to talk about two things today. First, I want to talk about the difference that a positive attitude makes in our lives. And then I want to talk about the difference that other people's love makes in our lives. I've got a bit more to say about the first one than the second, so that will take up a little bit more time. But they are both essential elements of what Paul has to say about being thankful. So let's start by talking about the difference that a positive attitude makes in our lives. And in verse 8, we see Paul telling the believers in Philippi to try and develop a habit of thinking positive thoughts. He says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Like focus your mind on happy ideas, not gloomy ideas, and then you'll feel better. It's not hard to figure out what Paul is getting at here. Like throughout this whole letter, he has been talking to the believers in Philippi about how they should stay faithful to Jesus. Like even when they're facing trials, whether those trials are in the form of persecution from outside the church or discord within it, they should stay faithful to Jesus because knowing Jesus is the answer to all of those difficulties. So if the people were to dwell on those difficulties to the point that those difficulties are dominating their thoughts, it will crowd out their thoughts about how they want to know Jesus and how they already know Jesus. And indeed, just a little earlier in the letter, in chapter 3, verse 10, Paul writes, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in death. You see, Paul sees this focus on Jesus as something that is all-consuming and which should cause him to reevaluate the power of those things which depress him or make him feel hopeless. Like they don't actually have the power that they do because of Christ. That they don't have the power that he thought they did because of Christ. And the advice that Paul gives to the believers in Philippi in chapter 4, this, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, that is really just another way of expressing this idea, that they should think about Jesus instead of all the bad things in their lives. Jesus is the best thing after all. He is the most excellent and most praiseworthy thing. But even without making specific reference to Jesus, this advice to focus their minds on happy thoughts instead of gloomy thoughts is still a testament to the changed power dynamic that Christ brought about. Like those bad thoughts don't have to control us. They don't have to define our lives. And when we don't let them, we end up being happier. Now, it should be noted that this advice is very different from another piece of advice that sounds very similar, which is to focus your mind on happy ideas and deny the reality of gloomy ideas. You see, a lot of believers seem to think that in order to be faithful to God, they have to repress their negative thoughts. Like when they realize that they have unholy desires or they're exhibiting inappropriate reactions or that the thoughts that dominate their mind just aren't completely honoring to God, they think that they not only have to shift their thoughts away from those things, but that they have to pretend that they never even struggled with shifting their thoughts away from those things. And that is a shame, because that introduces a lot of dishonesty into their relationships with other believers, and especially with their relationship with God. And even worse, it actually short-circuits the powerful transformation that Jesus is supposed to have in their lives. Because the goal of the Christian life isn't to repress our sinful or unfaithful thoughts, it's to redeem them. That means bringing those thoughts, those desires, those attitudes to the cross and laying them down at the feet of the one who is powerful enough to take them from us and to make us clean, to make us holy. If we repress those thoughts and act as though there is nothing there that needs to be laid down at the foot of the cross, then we're cutting those parts of our lives off from the redemptive power of Christ, which makes us like him in his death. Indeed, one of the most profound things that I have learned about prayer over the years, or over the course of my spiritual journey, is that the evil one can't interfere with brutally honest prayers. Like, if I'm struggling with lust, say, and I pray to God saying, Lord, right now I'm struggling with lust, help me. That leaves no room for the evil one to twist what I'm saying or to introduce doubt. There's no room for him to make me doubt whether God will still love me if he knew how sinful I was. Nor is there any room for me to go all wishy-washy about what it is I actually need from God and why. The result is that I end up being more confident in my prayers because I'm asking God to redeem what is broken, which he can do, rather than trying to repress what's broken in myself in hopes that he will be pleased. Not only does that make my prayers more honest, it also allows me to be more confident and happy in the midst of unfortunate circumstances. And this is what Paul is talking about in verses 12 to 13, when he says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Again, the solution to negative thoughts brought about by unfortunate circumstances is not to repress those thoughts. It is to rely on the supernatural strength that Christ gives him. And when he uses that supernatural strength to focus his mind on happy thoughts instead of gloomy thoughts, he discovers that he can be content no matter how dire the situation might be. Now, this is a good piece of advice for reasons that I've just talked about, but it's a piece of advice that is actually quite unfashionable right now. Indeed, if the church often pressures people to deny the reality of their misfortune, our society often pressures people to magnify the reality of their misfortune. As in, nowadays, people are taught to be so alert to any harm that might have been done to them and to demand that other people take notice of that harm, that they don't know how to stop focusing on all that's going wrong and just get on with life. Now, this may have started in a fairly noble desire to be more sensitive to those who have experienced hardship, and that is admirable. But it has been taken to such extremes that people now, whether consciously or subconsciously, try to outbid each other in terms of who has the greatest claim to victim status. As the journalist Matthew Iglesias explains, our educational institutions have increasingly created an environment where students are objectively incentivized to cultivate their own fragility as a power move. Now, he's specifically talking about colleges, and that probably explains why he uses so many big words in there, but his point extends into other settings as well. And he is saying that the people who establish these social conventions at colleges and at other similar institutions have been teaching young people that the way to get what they want is to describe the hardships that they face, either as an individual or as a member of a group, in the most catastrophic manner possible. And that might work in those settings, at least in a twisted sort of way, but it actually goes against everything that we know about mental health. Because one of the bedrock principles of emotional wellness is to recognize that we have control over our emotional reactions, at least to a certain degree. As in, even if something genuinely bad happens to you, it is still up to you to decide how to react. And if you react by looking for ways in which you can overcome the adversity that you're going through, that will eventually help you to feel better and to regain your self-confidence. So we call this resilience. But if you react by emphasizing the unfairness of what has happened to you and how badly you've been harmed by it, in the long run, that just makes you more depressed. Now, this is not to say that no one ever has a legitimate reason to complain about the injustices that they have suffered. They certainly do, and The Bible is full of like legitimate complaints, but as Jill Filipovich writes, it is a choice to process feelings of discomfort or even offense through the language of deep emotional, spiritual, or even physical wound. And choosing to do so may make you worse off. Leaning into the language of harm creates and reinforces feelings of harm. And while using that language may give a person some short-term power in progressive spaces, it's pretty bad for most people's long-term ability to regulate their emotions, to manage inevitable adversity, and to navigate a complicated world. So when we deliberately turn our minds to what we have to be thankful for, that helps us to develop a positive attitude, which enables us to overcome hardship better than if we magnify that hardship. Now, that isn't to say that we should repress our negative emotions, because we should always be honest about how we're feeling, especially with God. But choosing to think about how our bad situations can be redeemed by our own actions and by God working in our lives is both more beneficial and more faithful than dwelling on just how unfair things are. Now, moving on, I would like to talk about the difference that other people's love makes in our lives. And this is closely connected to what Paul has to say about maintaining a positive attitude, because the things that he was most thankful for, other than God's grace, of course, were the relationships that he had with other believers. He was especially thankful for how those other believers showed him in tangible ways that they cared for him. As we read in verse 10, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned but had no opportunity to show it. This gives us a glimpse of just how much value Paul attaches to personal relationships. The idea that those other believers might have had no avenue to express their concern for a fellow believer is seen as something that is lamentable. It's not like these people can relax when other people aren't around as though they've gotten out of doing a chore. It's that they should be rejoicing like he is when other people are around so that they can show them love. Now, speaking as someone who is a bit of an introvert, honestly, this is not how I generally think. I only have so much energy for social interactions, and when I have expended it all, I need to retreat and be on my own for a while so that I can recharge. And I get the feeling, both from this passage and from several other passages in the New Testament, that Paul was an extrovert, not an introvert. As in, I think he genuinely found that he was recharged by being around other people, and that he was always looking forward to the next social interaction or the next opportunity to be around people whom he could authentically converse with. I can't really understand that, at least not myself, but I get it conceptually. And if you're like me, then and you're not like that, then I hope you will still agree with me that there is something different about being around people when they are showing you love and when you're showing them love. That is not a chore. That is not something that drains us, even if other social interactions might be. Indeed, that feeling that comes from being in a deep, emotionally fulfilling relationship with other people is such a blessing that Paul describes it in sacred terms. As we read in verse 18, I have received full payment and have more than enough. I am amply supplied now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to God. Now, when I was originally going through this passage, what struck me was the first half of this verse, where where Paul describes his interactions with the believers in Philippi and talks about how valuable they have been to him. And like the terms that he uses, such as having received full payment and being amply supplied, suggest the idea of a transaction of supply and demand. Like it is a beneficial transaction, to be sure. Like it gives him exactly what he wants and what he needs, and it leaves him and it gives him a feeling of contentment that is rarely associated with transactional relationships. But the imagery of the first half of this verse is very much associated with worldly ways of acquiring and measuring value, like commercial ways. And I thought that was really interesting. Heck, I even based the title of I even based my title of the sermon on one of those phrases and called the sermon "Amply Supplied." I want to convey the idea that God has blessed us with way more than we could ever need or want, and we just have to recognize just how much blessing there is. And I still think that is true, and I think that is a thought that is worthy of our reflection. But the more that I contemplated that specific verse, the more I realized that the ways we relate to one another can, in Paul's eyes, also reach beyond this world. I mean, when we're thinking about what we have to be thankful for, the first thing that pops into our minds are usually objects or things that allow us to get objects. Like oh, I'm really thankful that I have a car, or I'm really thankful that I have a job which will allow me to save up to buy a car, stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Indeed, that is good to express thankfulness for those kinds of things. But there is something about identifying and expressing thankfulness with regards to how other people have blessed you that is just different. There's just something transcendent that occurs, or at least can occur, when we show love to other people. And when they show love to us, it is like giving a sacrifice, a pleasing offering to God. As Pastor and Professor David E. Fitch explains, nothing, absolutely nothing, is as life-transforming for either me or my son than actually being present with each other and to God. When we sit face to face, listening and tending to what's going on in the other person, and when we do the same together with God, amazing transformation and goodness begins. I love that last line. Amazing transformation and goodness begins. That is the kind of blessing I want to experience. And I don't know about you, but I would say that kind of blessing cannot come from mere objects. Sure, we can be thankful for objects. Like that doesn't mean that we're shallow or anything. Indeed, in verse 18, Paul is talking about physical gifts that he has received. But the important thing isn't what those gifts are. It's the fact that they came from his friends who gave them to him in order to bless him. Indeed, when Paul says that he is amply supplied, it's not clear whether he's talking about having received more than enough stuff to meet all of his needs and wants, or having received more than enough love from the people who were giving him the gifts. Now, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. But the second meaning is especially convincing given the general tone of this passage. Paul wants the believers in Philippi to know that the way they've shown love to him has made a real difference. And so when we try and identify and express what it is we're thankful for, yeah, sure, we can talk about material objects that we have, or jobs, or education, or opportunities for personal growth. Those things are all great. We should be thankful for them. But what I hope that we will pay special attention to is the way that other people show us love. Like how do the people in our lives bless us, and how can we bless them in return? Those are questions that we can easily overlook, but they are perhaps the most important questions that we can ask of ourselves when it comes time to thinking about what it is we should be thankful for. Now, this brings us to the end of my part of this sermon. I've talked about the difference that a positive attitude makes in our lives and about the difference that other people's love makes in our lives. And hopefully I have conveyed something useful to you about what it means to give thanks in a distinctly Christian way, and in a way that recognizes the redemptive work that God is continually doing in us and through us. But a Thanksgiving sermon is never... like a Thanksgiving sermon on its own is never as powerful as hearing people express what it is they have to be thankful for in their own words. So that's what we're going to do to finish the service today. I'm going to sit down, and there's going to be a mic up here, the purple mic on the stand. And if anyone wants to come up and share something it is that they are thankful for, I would encourage you to do that. I won't set a time limit. Some people, we all know, some people like to ramble on, and that's okay so long as you're staying on topic. Don't go off on tangents. So long as you're talking about something that you are thankful for, that is okay. And if you're not comfortable sharing in front of the whole congregation, please don't feel any pressure to do so. But I would say that I hope you will at least take the time to express what it is you're thankful for to someone today, like even if that is in private. So anyway, I will just open the mic up now and take a few moments. I will just kind of play it by ear when to cut it off. We'll see how much of a stampede we have. But that's what I hope that you are thinking about. Like, what are you thankful for? How is it that you have been amply supplied in this life?